Tonight, we begin with a military escalation that U.S. officials had feared, predicted, and desperately tried to prevent, a war trigger that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in under 72 hours. 72 hours that shattered diplomatic norms, 72 hours that left 3,000 Iranian soldiers dead, 72 hours that pushed the Middle East to the brink of global conflict. What Iran's Revolutionary Guard did 3 days ago crossed a line that Washington, Jerusalem, and Riyadh had hoped, prayed would hold, and when that line broke, the United States did not hesitate. They responded with fury, precision, and overwhelming technological dominance. This is no longer a shadow war. This is no longer deterrence. This is kinetic reality, and the world map may never look the same again. For nearly 6 months now, there had been signals, not formal declarations from Tehran. Not press conferences by Khamenei, just whispers, encrypted chatter, troop rotations, and satellite heat signatures that Iran was preparing something catastrophic, something final. Iran has been provocative, yes, but they have been surgical in their provocations. Their moves have followed a certain cadence, a tempo, almost a script, proxy. Strikes, deniable sabotage, calibrated missile launches, always designed to test limits without crossing them. But what set off alarm bells in CENTCOM this past Monday was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Iran's asymmetric warfare know the indicators. The encrypted bursts between Quds Force cells, the movement of mobile missile launchers near Iraqi and Syrian borders, the sudden activation of underground command bunkers beneath Tehran, and then silence, total eerie radio silence, all of it vanished overnight. And whenever Iran goes quiet, it means something is about to get very, very loud. Analysts called it the calm before the storm, but this wasn't a storm. This was a hurricane. Early Tuesday morning, for 17 local time, NORAD detected what they described as an unprecedented multi-axis missile launch, including Shahab for ballistic missiles armed with cluster warheads that had not been deployed outside Iranian soil in over 15 years. These are not weapons for messaging. These are weapons for annihilation, the kind Iran only deploys when signaling one of three things: total war, regime survival, or divine mandate. Observers at the Pentagon didn't know which box this fit into or whether it fit all three simultaneously. But one thing became chillingly clear. Iran was changing its posture, not incrementally, not tactically, but strategically, existentially. And when a theocratic nuclear threshold state shifts strategy without warning, even by a single degree, the world doesn't just pay attention, it braces. The emergency response issued by the White House last night was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent, apocalyptic, even. Senior defense officials after the AM Situation Room meeting described Iran's strike as unprovoked, genocidal in intent, and perhaps most terrifyingly, calculated to trigger Article 5, meaning Iran wanted NATO drawn into direct combat. Because here's the brutal truth. Iran's strategy only works if the West hesitates. The United States did not. In fact, their counter-response was among the fastest, deadliest, and most technologically advanced we've seen since Desert Storm. Here's what we know. Within 18 minutes of the first Iranian missile crossing into Iraqi airspace, the U.S. launched Operation Thunderclap, a synchronized cyber-electronic kinetic assault unlike anything ever seen. These weren't cruise missiles. These weren't drone strikes. These were AI-coordinated hypersonic swarms, EMP bursts over Iranian command grids, and stealth bombers surgically erasing entire brigades from existence. Weapons the Pentagon only deploys when preparing to decapitate a regime. Tonight, CENTCOM confirmed that U.S. forces launched simultaneous strikes on 47 Iranian targets, including the elite Quds Force 5th Corps HQ near Avaz, recently upgraded to nuclear-ready status for what analysts believe was preparation for a regional doomsday scenario. The U.S. struck before Iran could activate its secondary command chain. They hit radar installations across the Strait of Hormuz. They hit missile silos disguised as civilian factories near Isfahan. They hit underground fuel depots feeding Iran's proxy armies in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon, depots likely preparing to sustain a multi-front war. In other words, the U.S. didn't just retaliate. They dismantled Iran's ability to wage war, period. The logistics, the communications, the leadership nodes. This is what made the UN Security Council's emergency session so panicked. Iran's opening salvo wasn't symbolic. It was a declaration. It represented the kind of move that could ignite World War III if left unanswered, a deliberate provocation designed to fracture the Western alliance and rally the global South behind Tehran. And the United States, understanding that fully, responded not with restraint, but with annihilation, not recklessly, not emotionally, but with cold, surgical, strategic fury. They didn't invade. They didn't occupy. They didn't target civilians. They hit the spine. They hit the brain. They hit the hands that pulled the trigger. And here's where the story becomes even more terrifying. Sources inside Langley now believe Iran's attack was designed to probe the cohesion of the NATO alliance after the Ukraine fatigue and Gaza distractions. Khamenei wanted to see whether the West would fracture, whether Biden would waver, whether Europe would hide, whether Israel would be left alone to burn. But instead, the opposite happened. The United States didn't waver. They unleashed a response so swift, so unified, so technologically devastating that even the Kremlin paused its own war games to watch. You don't get Khamenei's attention easily, but today he watched his generals die live on secure feeds as U.S. hypersonics turned their bunkers into tombs. CIA analysts speaking anonymously to Reuters described Iran's gambit as eschatological brinksmanship, a way to force divine intervention by triggering Armageddon, but the U.S. proved. Today, they remain both omnipresent and omnipotent. Their strikes weren't just fast, they were so surgically precise that hospital generators in nearby cities remained untouched, while Iranian SAM sites 200 meters away were vaporized. That level of discrimination matters because it shows this wasn't rage, it was message. It shows the U.S. is not a declining empire playing defense. They are still the apex predator, and they will annihilate anyone who dares test that. As dawn broke over the Gulf, reports flooded in revealing the true scale of America's wrath. The Israeli Air Force carried out suppression missions over southern Lebanon, forcing Hezbollah into full retreat within 90 minutes. British Typhoons operating from Cyprus destroyed Iranian drone factories in Syria that had been active since 2022. U.S. Cyber Command, operating from Fort Meade, reportedly crashed Iran's entire domestic internet for 6 hours, cutting off propaganda, recruitment, and battlefield coordination. This wasn't just retaliation. This wasn't just deterrence. This was systemic collapse. This was operational erasure. And operational erasure is the one thing Iran has never survived since the Iran-Iraq War. For every drone they sent into Saudi skies, the U.S. erased a battalion. For every proxy they armed, the U.S. burned their supply line. For every threat whispered in Farsi, the U.S. answered in fire. Remember, Iran thought the U.S. was exhausted. They thought Europe was divided. They thought Russia and China would shield them at the UN. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. The U.S. acted unilaterally, and the world followed. Europe imposed emergency sanctions within hours. Russia abstained from condemning the strikes. China quietly evacuated its nationals from Tehran. History won't remember this as an American strike. It will remember it as the moment the old world order died and a new one, forged in fire, took its place. What makes this moment so volatile and so historic is that Iran's attack came at the precise moment Ayatollah Khamenei is facing terminal decline. His health is failing, his economy is collapsing, his people are rioting, his proxies are fracturing, the hardliners want holy war, the moderates want surrender, the Revolutionary Guard wants total control, the street wants bread. Khamenei is balancing civil war at home with global war abroad, and when dying dictators make desperate moves. They're not acting from strength, they're acting from extinction-level fear. This wasn't strategy. This was suicide dressed as martyrdom. The White House's statement, broadcast globally via emergency alert system, was designed to signal one thing: the era of appeasement is over. Officials said plainly, Iran's aggression is inconsistent with the continued existence of international peace. That is diplomatic language for, if you shoot at us again, we erase your cities. You don't hear that tone unless the world is seconds from midnight. Meanwhile, Ayatollah Khamenei addressed the nation in a trembling, furious speech from an undisclosed bunker. He said, America has committed genocide against the faithful. He said, the blood of our martyrs will drown the great Satan. He said, this is not defeat. This is divine invitation. These are not words of a statesman. These are the last gasps of a man who knows he has lost and is dragging the world down with him. Here's what makes this even more horrifying. Iran's strike wasn't isolated. Simultaneously, North Korea test-fired 3 ICBMs over Japan. Hezbollah launched 200 rockets into northern Israel. Houthi rebels seized 2 oil tankers in the Red Sea. Wagner Group mercenaries mobilized toward the Caspian Sea, all within 12 hours. When Iran moves the board like this, it's not war, it's Armageddon. Analysts now consider 3 terrifying possibilities. 1, Iran is preparing a dirty bomb strike via proxy. 2, frame the West. 2, they're attempting to trigger Article 5 by hitting a NATO member, likely Turkey or Greece. 3, the nightmare scenario: they've already smuggled tactical nukes into Venezuela, aimed at Miami. But today, the U.S. took all those cards off the table. They didn't negotiate. They didn't warn. They didn't delay. They burned the table. What we're watching now is a test of civilization. Iran wants to see if chaos can break the West. The U.S. wants to prove order still rules. NATO wants to prevent nuclear winter. The UN wants to avoid becoming irrelevant. Tonight, sources inside the Kremlin say Putin is shocked at the speed of collapse. They say China has placed its DF-41s on standby not to defend Iran. but to protect its own interests. And they say Khamenei's order to prepare the Mahdi division is likely part of a last-ditch doomsday cult strategy intended to fulfill apocalyptic prophecy. But the U.S. is not retreating. In fact, they're advancing, carrier groups moving into the Gulf, THAAD batteries activating in Jordan. Special forces securing oil fields in Iraq, their message to Iran. You chose fire, now burn, their message to the world. We are still the sword, and we are unsheathed. As this week unfolds, we'll learn more about what Iran truly hoped to achieve, but this much is undeniable. The U.S. strike was not revenge. It was reset. It prevented global war. It exposed Iran's hollow power. It reestablished American supremacy. What happens next depends on Tehran's next 48 hours. If they escalate, this becomes World War III. If they surrender, history will call this the day the 21st century's first superpower reawakened. Either way, the U.S. has shown they are awake. Tonight, sources in Tehran confirmed that Iranian security forces launched mass arrests across multiple ministries, including members of Khamenei's personal staff that had recently been promoted for what analysts believe was their loyalty during succession planning. The ERG moved before Israel could extract their asset. They hit the Supreme Leader's medical team. They hit his communications staff. They hit security personnel that were likely recruited years ago. In other words, Iran targeted the infrastructure of betrayal, the network that would have made the operation complete. This is what made Washington's warning so urgent. Israel's operation wasn't just symbolic. It was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could decapitate Iran's leadership if left unchecked, and Iran, understanding that fully, responded with force, not strategically, not calmly, but desperately. They didn't confirm Khamenei's condition. They didn't reassure the public. They purged their own people. They shut down communications. And here's where the story becomes even more volatile. Western intelligence agencies now believe that Israel's operation was designed to test the fragility of Iran's succession framework after years of speculation about Khamenei's declining health. Israel wanted to see whether Iran would fracture. But instead, something unexpected happened. The ERG didn't fracture. They consolidated power with a speed, a brutality that even Tel Aviv noticed. You don't get the Revolutionary Guard's attention easily. But today, Israel did. Intelligence analysts speaking with Western media under anonymity described Israel's operation as a stress test, a way to expose fault lines in Iran's power structure, but the ERG proved today that they remain both paranoid and prepared. Their purges were not only immediate, they were comprehensive, so precisely targeted that even long-trusted officials vanished within hours. That speed matters because it shows preparation. It shows that the ERG is not merely reacting. They are executing a contingency plan that has existed for years. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Iran's internal response. The ERG carried out arrests of over 30 officials, forcing the suspension of government operations. Iranian intelligence targeted communications infrastructure that had been upgraded in the last 6 months. Quds Force operatives operating regionally reportedly recalled to Tehran, a move used by Iran only when internal security takes priority over external operations. This wasn't just a security response. This wasn't just damage control. This was a regime in survival mode. This was succession protocol. And succession protocol is the one thing Iran has struggled to clarify since Khamenei's health began declining. For every assurance Tehran has made, this attack has countered with something that exposes their vulnerability. Remember, Iran thought Khamenei's inner circle was impenetrable. They thought their counterintelligence had neutralized Israeli networks. They thought their supreme leader was untouchable. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Khamenei is reportedly incapacitated. Israeli penetration reached the highest levels, and Iran's vaunted security apparatus failed. What makes this moment so dangerous and so consequential is that this attack happened at a time when Khamenei's succession was already under intense internal pressure. Hardliners want Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader's son. Pragmatists want a collective leadership council. The ERG wants guaranteed control over any successor. And reformists want any opening they can find. Khamenei was balancing these demands while maintaining the illusion of stability. And when leaders in that position are suddenly incapacitated, the power vacuum isn't gradual. It's immediate. It's violent. The State Department's emergency advisory, now distributed to all US embassies in the region, was designed to signal that Washington is not willing to be caught off guard by escalation. Officials said plainly that the current situation was inconsistent with regional stability. That is diplomatic language for, we don't know what Iran will do next, and neither do they. You don't usually hear that tone from Washington, unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister addressed security officials in a brief, controlled statement tonight. He said, Israel's enemies must understand that there is no sanctuary. He said, "Those who threaten our existence will never be beyond our reach." And he said, "We do not confirm operations. We confirm results." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. This operation wasn't isolated. Along with the poisoning, Hezbollah also reported emergency communications with Tehran Houthi forces. Paused operations awaiting guidance, proxy networks across Iraq, increased defensive postures. All of this happened within the same 24-hour period. When Iran's entire proxy network shifts simultaneously, it means something larger is underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Israel is preparing follow-up operations to exploit the chaos. Another is that Iran is attempting to conceal Khamenei's true condition while stabilizing internally.